Hi, everybody. I would like to provide you some information about the DSM-5 anxiety disorders. So the DSM-5 identifies 6 anxiety disorders that we can diagnose in children, adolescents, and adults. These are separation anxiety disorders, specific phobia, social anxiety disorder, agoraphobia, and generalized anxiety disorder. So I'm just going to provide you a brief overview of some of these symptoms. SAD, separation anxiety disorder, really has the earliest age of onset between 7 and 8 years. And this is when children tend to show excessive anxiety about leaving their caregivers and other individuals to whom they are emotionally attached. So these children are often preoccupied by fears that some kind of misfortune or some kind of harm will befall themselves or their caregivers during the separation period. So very young children, for instance, might believe that monsters might kidnap them while their parents are away. Older children, on the other hand, might fear their parents will become injured at work. So how separation anxiety disorder presents itself looks a little different depending on the age. One of the things that we often see with SAD is school refusal behavior, which is defined by the refusal to attend classes or difficulty remaining in school for the whole day. And this is equally common in boys and girls, and most often we see this between the ages of 5 and 11. Now, if we look at generalized anxiety disorder is unlike other anxiety disorders in two important ways. First and foremost, it's characterized by worry instead of fear or panic. So they're not worried about specific objects or situations. Instead, they're worrying about future misfortune. The second way it's different is that generalized anxiety disorder is also more likely to be associated with depression than the other anxiety disorders. So the kind of hallmark symptom of GAD is what we call apprehensive expectation. It's just excessive anxiety and worry about the future. So these are often individuals who get labeled worrywarts by other people in their lives. Just stop worrying is kind of a common thing they hear, which seems hardly fair because anyone with anxiety knows how disabling and uncomfortable this state really is. So children and teens worry about activities and events in their everyday lives, performing well on tests, school assignments, athletics, peer relationships, these kinds of things. And oftentimes children with GAD are described by parents and teachers as, quote, little adults. They're often perfectionistic, they're punctual, they're eager to please, they're self-conscious around others, especially adults and authority figures. So they present this kind of illusion of maturity that makes them appear more emotionally competent than they really are. Then if we move on to the third anxiety disorder, specific phobias, this is one of the most common. It's also one of the most untreated anxiety disorders, and it's hard to kind of differentiate between a phobia and a fear. But most phobias fall into 5 categories: phobia of animals, phobias of the natural environment, phobias of blood, phobias of specific situations, for example, driving across a bridge or being in an elevator, and then the other subtype, choking, contracting an illness, costumed characters. So animal phobia is actually the most common type, and it tends to emerge between 8 and 9 years. Older children tend to fear situations that might result in injury to themselves or others. But common phobias among teens are fears of being alone and actually fear of tests and exams. So one of the things that differentiates a fear from a phobia is that people with phobia actively avoid what it is that they are afraid of. So unlike fear, which is adaptive to a certain extent because it protects us, phobia actually is kind of a disabling response because we become avoidant of something instead of learning how to deal with it. The fourth anxiety disorder is known as social anxiety disorder, and this is really just characterized by a persistent fear of social or performance situations where someone thinks embarrassment might occur or judgment might occur. So like individuals with specific phobia, people with social anxiety disorder show immediate anxiety or panic when they encounter a fear situation. So if they have to get up and do a class presentation, any kind of public speaking, sometimes even just ordering food at a restaurant or drive-through, attending a party or social gathering, any kind of performance in front of others might really trigger this kind of response. And they worry that others will think they're going crazy, or that they look stupid, or that others will notice how anxious they are. Some individuals with SAD only experience this kind of response in a performance situation, but not in other settings. So, for example, a teenager with social anxiety disorder might fear a piano recital or an athletic event, but might be perfectly comfortable in non-performance situations like parties. So this usually emerges in late childhood, early adolescence. It's not usually diagnosed before age 10, and it lasts about 20 to 25 years. So it is not a short-lived condition. And then the final anxiety disorder that I want to talk about is obsessive compulsive disorder. And this is characterized by recurrent obsessions or compulsions. So what is an obsession? Obsession is a recurrent or an intrusive thought. I call it a case of the mental hiccups. You know, when you get that song in your head that you just can't get out of your head. Any attempt to ignore or resist the thought can actually provoke more anxiety. And then a compulsion is what we do to try to deal with the anxiety. It's a repetitive or rigid behavior, for example, hand washing, or a mental act like praying, repeating certain words, or counting. And the person feels compelled to do this. In fact, so much so that they feel it, if they don't do this, something bad might actually happen. So to get a diagnosis of OCD, the obsessions or compulsions must be frequent enough to interfere with daily life or cause significant, distress. This is a very disabling disorder. It's more common among boys than it is with girls, with a gender ratio of about 2 to 1. But by late adolescence, this evens out a bit. And these children often have other disorders, trichotillomania, which is compulsive hair pulling, sometimes ADHD. But the most common obsessions among young children and teens are a fear of germs, a fear of harm befalling the self or others, and an overwhelming need for symmetry and order. And the most common compulsions are washing and cleaning, checking locks and stove taps, counting, repeating, touching, and straightening. I hope this has helped work out some of the differences in those disorders.